We're going to continue in our series here of our studies here in Ecclesiastes, and we're to chapter number 9. And tonight we're going to be talking about the last enemy, and this is something that Solomon changes gears and talks about here in this this chapter number 9. And I was going through and looking, I found some interesting quotes and sayings as I was doing a study on this. And this quote goes, "Oh, why do people waste their breath inventing dainty names for death?" This is a quote by John Brackin. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. The late laureate of England wrote these words in his poem entitled Graveyards. And every honest person can answer the question, as Brackin did in his poem, is that we often invent dainty names because we don't want to face up to the reality of what death is about. And this is what Solomon touches on here in the first part of this chapter here in chapter number 9. Sociologist by the name of Ernest Becker in the book The Denial of Death claimed that of all things that move men, one of the principal ones is his terror of death. Now, I have ministered over the years and talked to many families who have had loved ones to pass away that have stepped into eternity, and often you'll hear they won't really say that they have died or that death has occurred, but often they'll give these phrases sort of like saying, well, they've left us. They have departed. They have went home, and or maybe even to say that they've went to sleep or they've passed away. And we do know that when a person trusts in Jesus, that they do actually, their bodies, their physical bodies do go to sleep for a temporary state, and their souls do go on to be with the Lord, because the Bible tells us to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. However, at the same time, when thinking about death, Solomon wants us to get a grasp here upon this. And this assurance of knowing that once we die, we do go to heaven, should not make death any less real in our thinking or our feeling of how we do relate to it. One person said this: the person who treats death lightly may fear death actually the most. If we take life seriously, and we should, then we can't treat death in a flippantly type of state, not taking it seriously. Now, this isn't the first time the subject of death has come up in the discussion of Solomon. We see many times throughout the first several chapters we've already discussed, and then he'll mention it again in chapter number 12. But death is something that oftentimes people shy away from. They don't want to discuss. It's almost like a type of ideology that we just can't discuss it. But death is real. Death happens. I mean, it happens. It's going to happen to us all. Unless we are raptured up, we will one day all see death in some way, shape, or form. And that's the vehicle that God has chosen for us to step out of this life into the next. But the important thing for us to be is be ready. I really like this quote by Robert E. Lee. I'm a big fan of history, and Robert E. Lee, yes, I know he was a Confederate, and I know he fought on the South, but if you study Robert E. Lee and you study some of the men that fought for the Confederacy, some of those individuals had a devout fear of a holy God, and I think Robert E. Lee was one of those. Stonewall Jackson was another one. But Robert E. Lee had this saying, and he said this, some of his last, maybe even his last word that he said as he lived upon this world. He said, "Let the tent be struck." What did he mean by that? He said that this tent, this here, I've done all I can do in this life, and I've prepared for what comes ahead. And I think that Robert E. Lee knew where he was going. He had trusted in Jesus as his personal Lord and Savior. And unless Jesus raptures us out, we will one day also strike our tent and leave this battlefield, because we are here, we're just pilgrims and we're strangers here. Like the old song says, pilgrims and strangers here, seeking a city to come, and we must be ready to do that. And it's a good thing to know without a shadow of a doubt that if something were to happen to us here in this life, that we know that we know that we know that when we take our last breath, we know where we're headed. And that's an important concept, and that's something important for us all to hold. Like what it says here in 2 Corinthians, this is chapter number 5, verses 1 through 8. It says, "For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan earnestly, desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is in heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, for not that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Now he that hath wrought us for the same thing is God, who has also given us the earnest of the Spirit." An eternal building in the heavens, a place that is not perishable, a place that is eternal, a place that will never fade away. I like the old song. It says, "I am going to a city where the roses never fade." And what a beautiful place that's going to be one day when we're there. One day when we see death, or where Jesus comes to take us out. But as we look at this, I think that Solomon wants us to really understand two concepts as we think about this passage here. There's two sections of this, and in this chapter, Solomon draws two conclusions. First of all, in the first 10 verses, he's talking about how death is unavoidable. Woody Allen, y'all probably know him. He's a comedian. He's done a lot of funny things. And Woody Allen once said this. He says, "I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to be there when it happens." But the fact of the matter is, he will be there when death happens. As every human being must. We can't escape death. That's not something that you can escape. And because there is no escaping death, it will happen, and you'll have to face that. None of us know how it'll happen. I think that if we did have some type of knowledge to know about how our death would happen or what day it would be on, we'd be constantly living in an anxious state. What can I do to prevent it? Can I change it? I'm so thankful that I don't have the knowledge of a holy God to know all things, because we would be crazy. We would be trying to think and try to do so much, and that's why we don't know that. That's why we don't know what the future things hold. But death is not an accident. It's an appointment. Like I said, look at what it says in Hebrews 9, verse number 27. "And it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment." So there is a time appointed for us to take our last breath, and then we face the judgment. But as we look at this, Solomon goes in here starting in verse number 9 and verse number 1, talking about that God holds the future when we think about these things. Look what he says here. "For all this I considered in my heart, even to declare all this, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. No man knoweth their either love or hatred by all that is before them. Only He knows our future." Only God does. Whether it will bring blessing, that's what Solomon's saying here with this word of love, whether it will be blessing that comes, or whether it be the actual hatred, which is sorrow. He knows when those things will come. He knows what lies ahead for us. And Solomon wasn't suggesting that we are some type of just passive type of individual that in this cosmic realm that's just following some type of unchangeable script that God has laid out there for us. And He's not some type of uncaring director. That's not what he's suggesting here. But looking at the chapters that we've covered already, previous to chapter number 9, Solomon has emphasized our freedom of discernment and decision. However, only God knows what the future holds and what will happen tomorrow because of the decisions that we make today. So first of all, we see God holds the future, and then we go to verse number 2, is there's a question about why bother to live a godly life? Look what he said. This is interesting. Verse number 2. All things come alike to all. There is one event to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and to the clean and to the unclean, to him that sacrificeth, and to him that sacrificeth not, as it is the good, so is the sinner. And he that sweareth, as he that feareth an oath. Now, whether we obey the law or disobey, whether we bring sacrifices or neglect them, make or break promises, we will all die the same. And yes, we do share a common destiny on earth, even with those who don't follow after Jesus, do not have that personal relationship. We all share that common destiny on earth, and that's it, death in the grave. But we do not share a common destiny in eternity. That's the difference. 1 Corinthians 15:26 speaks about we must face the last enemy. That's what we're talking about here. And decide how to deal with it. See, it says, listen to what Paul writes here. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. See, as Christians, we've trusted Jesus to save us from sin and death. He's the only one that can do it for us. And so as far as we're considered, the last enemy has been defeated because Jesus defeated death, hell, and the grave. He rose victorious over that. And because of Him rising victorious over that, we also have victory over death because of what He did for you and for me. But when we think about it, the enemy of death is because, yes, because that's enemy over us, that death was the enemy that separated us. And until someone that is Jesus died for us, then death had not been defeated. But He came, and since He rose from the dead, He defeated death. I have a picture that I usually post around Easter, and it's a picture of a little Grim Reaper sitting outside the empty tomb with a sign up that says, "Looking for work." And but Jesus was the only one that could do that for us. He's the only one that could defeat death. We could not defeat death. No one had ever, upon their own will, came back from the dead. Now, people had been raised from the dead by Jesus, but no one had raised themselves from the dead. So that was a difference in how all that worked. But here's a thing to think about. Once again, we're dealing with death. I feel like Dr. Death here tonight. We're talking a lot about that here in this first part. How people deal with the reality of death reveals itself in the way they deal with the realities of life. Solomon pointed out 3 possible things that people make to the ever-present fear of death. Number 1, and this is in verse number 3, is to escape death. Try to escape from it. Look what he says here. This is an evil thing among all things that are done under the sun, that there is one event unto all, yea, also the heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness in their heart while they live, and after that they go to the dead. Now, the fact of death and the fear of death will either bring out the best in people or the worst in people. Now, I've talked to many funeral directors, and they have given me some of the oddest stories of things that happen at funerals. They've shared with me where people have been so upset and just mad at each other over possessions that they had to separate families because of wanting the possessions, and they could not agree upon what to do with the departed last remains or what they had left. Where they've had to actually call the police to come and separate things, postpone the funeral, or actually cancel it because they could not gather together. Sometimes death brings out the worst in people. But also it can bring out the best. Sometimes it can bring people together. It can help heal damage that has been done over the years. But when death comes to a family, this is important. It doesn't create problems. The death doesn't create the problem. It just reveals what is already there. So he mentions here in verse number 3, a way that they can do that is try to escape. But also number 2, in verses 4 through 6, he speaks about endurance. They don't try to escape, but they endure. Let's look at right here, chapter 9, verse number 4. For to him that is joined to all the living there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more a reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. And their love and their hatred and their envy is now perished, neither have they any more a portion forever in anything that is done under the sun. Now, there are some that don't try to escape, but they actually endure. They hold on to that ancient motto, where there's life, there's hope. The motto goes back as far back as the 3rd century BC. It's part of the conversation between two farmers who are featured in a poem by the Greek poet Theocritus. Console yourself, dear Bodos, says Cordon, things may be better tomorrow. While there's life, there's hope. Only the dead have none. That's an exact quote. Interesting, here we see Solomon writing about this in these verses 4 through 6. But Solomon would be the last person to discourage anyone from hoping for the best. Listen to what he says here again. It's an interesting thought. Here in verse number 4. He says, for to him that is joined to all the living there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. What's he saying here? Because as you know, during this culture, dogs were despised. I mean, we know this when, remember the story of Lazarus when he was out front of the rich man's area there, his home. The dogs come and licked his sores. I mean, dogs were not seen as some type of romanticized creature. It wasn't little Fido that was coming up. It wasn't little Boo Boo that was coming up to jump and give you those warm lovin's and those big licks. I mean, dogs were nasty. They were not looked at as beautiful man's best friend creatures. And here we see here another thing here. A journalist by the name of Norman Cousins said the human body experiences a powerful gravitational pull in the direction of hope. And that is why the patient's hopes are the physician's secret weapon. They are the hidden ingredients in any prescription. So he's saying here there is hope to endure when death comes, to pull through, and to, when you deal with death, be an encouragement. But also, thirdly, is an enjoyment. Look at what it says here in verses 7 through 10. Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, and drink thy wine with a merry heart. For God now accepteth thy works. Let the garments be always white, and let thy head lack no ointment. Live joyfully with the wife with whom thou lovest all the days of the life of thy vanity, which hath given thee under the sun, all the days of thy vanity, for that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. What does this mean here, what he's saying here? Go thy way. Well, he's saying don't sit around. Don't be brood. Don't just sit around doing nothing. Get up and live. That's what he's talking about doing, is get up and live. Get up and live your life. Don't waste your life away. God has blessed us with so much, so raise up. Do what God has called us to do. Be abundant. Go out and be someone that is resourceful, can do things. A movie that I like, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, I think it's one of the greatest movies that's ever been. There's a lot of those. Comes on TV a lot. Has a few cuss words here and there, but I think it's got a great message in the movie. It's The Shawshank Redemption. I don't know if many of y'all have seen that movie. One of the greatest quotes in movie history, I think, is when Andy Dufresne is in prison and Morgan Freeman's sitting there with them, and they're there in the little courtyard there where they're in prison. And Andy looks up at him and says this was because of some things that were going on there, and he didn't think he'd ever get out of prison. He'd been framed. He said, either get busy living or get busy dying. And I think there's a lot of truth to that as we exist here, is get busy living life, because James talks about that life is just a vapor. And we've got to get busy living it, because if not, we're just waiting to die. And God has placed us here for a purpose. He didn't create us just so that we would exist, just to take up space. God made us. He created us. He molded us and shaped us inside the womb. He even told this to Jeremiah. He said, before you were formed in the womb, I knew you, because I had prospered you. And the thing is, God has prospered us, and He has a plan for our lives. And this is what Solomon's talking about here. He says, get up and live. That's what he's saying. But this is a contrast to modern society's formula for happiness. Fast food and a full schedule, the addictive pursuit of everything new, live-in relationships, shortcuts guaranteed to help you avoid work but still get rich quick. There's a lot of things that take place here. But listen what he mentions here, starting in verse number 7. And it's interesting. He goes through these things and mentions these things that we should enjoy. First of all, in verse 7, he says, go thy way, eat the bread with joy, and drink thy wine with a merry heart, for God now accepteth thy works. He says, enjoy your meals. Hey, that's a great thing to do. We need to enjoy our food, don't we? See, the average Jewish family began the day with an early snack and then had a light meal brunch, sometimes between 10 in the morning and around noon. They didn't eat together until after sunset. When their work was finished was when they gathered for the main meal there of the day. And what did it consist of? It consisted largely of bread and wine and perhaps maybe some milk and cheese with a few vegetables that were in the fruit in the season, and sometimes fish. Meat was expensive. This just gives you a little bit of an idea about what they did. Meat was expensive and served only on special occasions. It was a simple meal. It was very simple to nourish both the body and the soul, for eating together, bread making, was a communal act of friendship and commitments. And this was important, and this is why he's talking about here, enjoy your meals. And we know also with King Solomon that when he sat down to a daily feast, this comes from 1 Kings chapter number 4, there is evidence that he didn't always enjoy his meals. Now you think, wow, King Solomon didn't always enjoy his meals? Maybe it was something he didn't like, or maybe he took it for granted. And maybe this is also, as I believe Ecclesiastes was written at a later part of his life. He looked back and he thought to himself, how I missed out on enjoying those things. Those meals, just taking the time to sit down and enjoy something that I was blessed to even have before me. Number 8, enjoy every occasion. Let thy garments be always white, and let thy head lack no ointment. Life is difficult in the average home, but every family knew how to enjoy special occasions such as weddings and reunions. It was a big deal. It was a really big deal for that time. Also in verse number 9, he says, live joyfully with the wife, whom thou lovest all the days of thy life, of the life of thy vanity, which he hath given thee under the sun, all the days of thy vanity, for that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun. Now, Solomon at this time would have known nothing about what it was said to be a live-in couple. Cohabitation today, we have people that just live together. Often people will do that to try to escape and not have to pay taxes. It's just a lot of things that are going on dishonest in a lot of ways. Or trial marriages. Believe me, I've heard people say, well, we just need to live together for a while to see if this is actually going to work out. We need to do a trial. So like you take a car on a trial run, see if you like it. We need to live together for a while, see if I can actually stand them, living together day in and day out. You know, it's sad Solomon didn't live up to his own ideals that he had. He forsook God's pattern for marriage, and as we know, he had a lot of women in his life, and he allowed many wives to take him away from the Lord. We know this in 1 Kings when we see that and how that all occurred. But I believe this is his confession in verse number 9. As we look at this in Ecclesiastes, a lot of these things are him looking back and saying, oh me, I've learned. And then he's saying, don't make the same mistake. It's now I know better. He's saying that you should enjoy your marriage, enjoy that time, love your spouse. But then also in verse number 10, he says, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. Now, the Jewish people looked upon work not as a curse, but they looked at it as a stewardship from God. It wasn't something that was there to burden them, but it was a stewardship. And even their rabbis learned a trade. Paul himself, the greatest preacher of all time, the one that led many souls, that preached Mars Hill and all these things that took place, he still even had a trade. He was a tent maker. That was his thing that he had. But he says here to enjoy your work in verse number 10. And then here we switch gears for a moment about him going to another topic, and this is life is unpredictable. This is verses. We'll look through the remainder of these verses. Let's look at verse number 9 and we'll read on down. It says, live joyfully with the wife whom thou lovest all the days of thy life with thy vanity, which he hath given thee under the sun, all the days of thy vanity. For that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with might, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. For man also knoweth not his time, as the fishes that are taken in an evil net, and as the birds that are caught in the snare, so are the sons of men snared in an evil time, when it befalleth suddenly upon them. This wisdom have I seen also under the sun, and it seemed great unto me. There was a little city, and few men within it, and there came a great king against it, and besieged it, and built great bulwarks against it. And there was found in it poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no man remembered that same poor man. Then said I, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of wise men are heard and quiet more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroyeth much good. Now, anticipating the response of his listeners and his readers, Solomon turned from his discussion on death, and now he begins to discuss life. So he's went from death to life now. And some would say this, if death is unavoidable, some would say, then the smartest thing we can do is major on our strengths and concentrate on life. When death comes, at least we'll have the satisfaction of knowing we worked hard and achieved some success. Well, with that being said, and some would say that, in the famous words of legendary coach Lou Holtz, not so fast, my friend. You know he says that on game day sometimes, especially when there's someone who gives a prediction on a game. Solomon would say this, you can't guarantee what will happen in life because life is so unpredictable. Like Forrest Gump said, life is like a box of chocolates. How many times has that been said and quoted before? But Solomon's saying here that you cannot predict life. You cannot predict what's going to happen. Oftentimes, you can be sheltered. You can do everything you can to protect yourself, to be healthy. You can take every vitamin pill that is known to man. And there's a lot. Just ask Kendra. There's vitamin doctor or reps that come into the office all the time trying to sell a new drug. A new drug trying to help with this. They've got them all the time. Lose weight drug, the get you happy drug, the get you up on your feet drug. They got the ones that'll help your headache drug, they'll help your pain drug. I mean, they've got them all. Any drug you want to think about, they have them for sale. But it doesn't matter with how we try to do things, how we try to plan life, how we try to predict things. Life is not predictable. It is very unpredictable. You just never do know. He goes here in verses 11 through 12 talking about our abilities are no guarantee of success. We always think that when we see a race, the fastest winner is always going to win, right? It's like in a race when you go to see race cars. Someone the day before could have practiced and blew everybody away by 5 miles per hour. The smartest soldiers, the strongest soldiers are supposed to win. The most skillful individuals are supposed to get the job. Isn't that correct? Just because the fastest racer is in the race doesn't mean that he's going to win. What happens if a cramp happens? I've seen races where people have been a long ways ahead of everybody else. A cramp, unpredictable, happens. Does that mean everybody else just stops and says, oh no, they've got a cramp, we got to stop the race, he's supposed to win? No. That's how these miraculous winners that have never won before win, when something unpredictable happens. I remember the 1990 Daytona 500. You know, Dale Earnhardt was supposed to get a Daytona 500. He finally got one, I think, in like 1998. My dad and I followed Dale Earnhardt. We had the T-shirts, the hats. My dad was an avid race car fan. I love racing myself. But I remember we were there, and I was 9 in 1990. We was watching that race. And Dale Earnhardt had led almost every lap that day at Daytona. And here he comes into the last final lap. He was in turn number 3. Flat tire. Derek Cope pulls around, wins the race, his first Daytona 500, first race he had ever won victory. Now today, do you hear much about Derek Cope? No. You hear a lot about Dale Earnhardt. He's passed away. His son, he's now retired. You hear a lot about that. Dale Earnhardt was supposed to win, but something unpredictable happened. And Derek Cope won that race. You see it a lot of times in sports. A team is supposed to be head and shoulders above another one. Something unpredictable happens. What am I getting at? Life is unpredictable. We cannot predict it. And this is what Solomon is talking about here. Verse number 12, look back there with me. He says, for man also knoweth not his time, as the fishes that are taken in an evil net, and as the birds that are caught in the snare. So are the sons of men snared in an evil time, when it falleth suddenly upon them. September 11th, 2001. Something unpredictable happened. Those Twin Towers were attacked by terrorists. Nobody knew that was going to happen. Nobody knew that day that would be their last. We never know. That's why, back up just a minute here, we have to be ready, because life is unpredictable. You can't predict anything. Just ask the weather people. They try to predict the weather, but sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. But also, our opportunities are no guarantees of success. Here in verses 13 through 18. He goes on and talks about this, coming down here to verse number 17 and verse number 18. The words of wise men are heard and quiet more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroyeth much good. Our opportunities are no guarantees. Opportunities that arise, you just can't predict what will happen. Life is unpredictable, and he was the biggest learner of them all with having this, of knowing how unpredictable things can be in life as we see it. So we see here that Solomon starts off with death, knowing that it is the last enemy. It's something that cannot be avoided. It's something you have to talk about, something you have to discuss. People want to shy away from it, but death is a reality. It's the big, which we call it, the big elephant in the room. You have to eventually discuss it because it's there. It's not going to go away. It's not something that's just going to magically just disappear one day. No. Just like everybody from the beginning of time, there have been people that have stepped into eternity through death. And we will also have that happen to us as well, unless, like I mentioned, the rapture happens. But then he goes on to this next part and discusses life, that life is unpredictable. And it's something that we cannot predict, and we need to live our life wisely and do what we're supposed to be. All right, thoughts on that? Anything grab your attention? Death isn't a very just, oh my goodness, that was a great topic to discuss, you know. That's the one that I posted back. I usually post that around Easter. He's out of work. Yeah, there's that quote. I'm not approving everything that goes on in that movie, okay? I'm just saying that I like it. I think it's got a great story to it. I just think that quote is so real with what Solomon's saying. He says, get busy living. You'd be surprised. I know some people, they sit around with no purpose. Yeah, the fastest runner wins the race, but the second rat gets the cheese. That's right. But you probably know people like that, and it's sad. No purpose, just they have no purpose, no plan, sit around with no objective, and that's not good, because live life. Yeah. And that's Solomon's saying, just live it. And there's many people that are unable to do things that person could do. And they would love to have those legs to go. They'd love to have the health to be able to stand up on their feet and go do something that they cannot do. And it saddens me to see that someone has that and they don't go do something with it. However, at the same time, I can't make them do it. You can't. But it still is sad to see that. And that's what Solomon's saying. He says, get up and live life. Don't be brood. Get up and live and do what God has given you to do. Any thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, you often, it's, I know some people that'll witness like this, and it'll catch people off guard. It says, do you know where you're going when you die? And it'll just take them back. And because most people just don't think about that reality, that death is real. And um, I think most just ignore it. They don't want to discuss it. But death is real. Death is a reality. It's something that is here. It's not going to go anywhere. And like I mentioned there at the beginning with that first quote, oh, why do people waste their breath inventing dainty names for death? Death is death. I mean, we can say what we want about it, but when someone dies, it's death. It's someone has died. There's no way to glorify it. There's no way to really make it sound good. I've heard people say this before, and I've kind of just cringed a little bit, going up to somebody in the casket and saying, boy, they look so good. And I mean, funeral homes try to make people look good, but the person is dead. I mean, all life is gone. So it's really hard to say someone looks really good when all life is gone from an individual. But death is a reality.
That look really bad.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they look good.
yeah, yeah, true, yeah.
I forgot to add someone up there is.
Yeah.
It's on Forsyth, the
Yeah.
Baptist church we live in Ohio.
Mhm.
She's having a knee replacement tomorrow. She's 87 years old.
Oh wow,
So
yeah,
we live near her.
okay,
She told me not too long ago.
yeah. Where does she live out up in?
It's in Ohio.
Yeah, I've met her once. She came down. I think it was for one Sunday we had, and yeah, yeah.
Janet Simpson's supposed to be having a knee replacement here real soon.
Janet is.
Janet is.
Okay. We'll
And
need to make a note of that. I didn't know about that one.
yeah, she's having a knee replacement.
Okay.
Friday, I think.
Friday? Oh,
Yeah, it's Friday.
okay.
And Lou's oldest brother, they found out that he had these cancers metastasized to his liver. So, he got on the pray.
Okay. Yeah. You told me he lives in.
Alaska.
Oh, that's right. You told me he lives in Alaska, and I couldn't remember. I knew it was up north somewhere.
South
Yeah.
Alaska.
Yeah. How long has he lived up there?
Long time. He retired from the Air Force up there, and he's like 81, I believe. He
Mm.
retired in his 50s, so he's been up there a long time.
Yeah. I know some people that they're passed away now, but her husband, they moved to Alaska. This is late 80s, early 90s, and they eventually came back, but he was in the Air Force up there. He served as a guard. Yeah. Yeah.
He loves it.
Hmm.
He's got a home down here. He used to come down for a few months, but he's not been able to the last little bit.
Yeah. Hmm.
I like for everybody to kind of pray for me a little bit. I mean, I do good and I act silly and stuff, but this stuff, it affects my speech,
Mm-hmm.
and it it's kind of it it affects more than I realized it did.
Mm.
My hands still, but I can't talk, or or different things. I walk kind of funny or something like that. But they said they're trying to find a good place, but I feel kind of weird till I get there. I mean, I'm thankful every day and blessed to be on
you've had a long road with it, but I'm glad that you're doing better on the road. And I know there's some side effects and things you're aware of that we may not all know that you know. But I'm happy, for you. Made her meaner? Okay.
But he can outrun me.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we pray, or anybody have something on their heart that maybe you forgot to mention so we can pray for? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they do. A lot of challenges, and we'll be having a special service coming up here for them, and it's very concerning at times when a high school senior graduates, because that officially, I think, begins the real world. Because high school is such a joy, and many of them want out, but I'm thinking, there's sometimes I wish I could go back, just enjoy that, not having the responsibilities and just all that comes with it. But when they start, I really wish that, and maybe one day, or they may even have this now, that many of our high schools would teach a course entitled like Real Life, like balancing a checkbook, um, how to set up your own account, like if you go to a bank, or even for men, like simple things like changing a tire or just changing oil, just things like that, normal life things, lessons, because many will graduate and they have no clue because most of it's been done for them. And so, and then they go to college, and I've heard testimonies of this. They walk into that first ethics class, that first philosophy class, and get the rug pulled out right from underneath them on what they believe. And that's where the doubt starts to come in. And so that's a very, very challenging time. And that's why that we got to pray for them. Because an 18-year-old, some of them 17, it's very hard. A lot of decisions, college decisions, things to make about what to do with life. A lot is there. So you're right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And it's sad that a lot of parents are more concerned about their education than their salvation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. Think that they think they have it all figured out. Yeah. Mm. All right. Well, thank y'all for coming. Let's be much in prayer for Sunday and for Victory Kids. Next Wednesday will be their last Wednesday, and then we're going to be having the little get together, the main thing over here in the sanctuary. So we won't be having the study. It'll be 2 weeks from tonight. Next Wednesday's the last one. So looking forward to being with them, meeting all the parents, talking to them. And got a lot going on over there. Sometimes we're unaware of, but I go over there and say hello and talk to people before I come over here. But I'm thankful that we have adults that are willing to work hard and put up with the hard-to-love ones at times. I've done that in youth ministry. Sometimes there's kids that are just hard to love and they will test you. And that's where you just have to pray, Lord, give me what I need to make it through this night and to make it through and deal with this child, because they are a challenge for sure. So, but thank you all. Pray for us. We'll pray for you. Let's stand together. And Barry, would you pray for us, please?